Susan, thank you so much for being willing to be our first person and joining us today. You have so much to share with us. We have just a short time, so we'll start right away. You were just 7 and living in the small town of Vacha in Germany when Hitler came to power in 1933. After that, of course, your life and that of your families changed dramatically. Start by telling us about your family and your life in the years leading up to Kristallnacht. Before then, what was your family's life like? Tell us about your family.
Well, as you said, I was born in a small town in the middle of Germany. In the town, there were about 30 Jewish families, and life was normal life. Very few children, because it was just 5 children. I started school in 1932, regular public school, and in 1934 I went to higher education school, but in 1936 I had to leave school. No Jewish children were allowed anymore in German schools, and I was sent to Frankfurt am Main and lived with complete strangers to attend a Jewish day school there. And my parents had to pay for that, naturally. Came 1938, Kristallnacht.
Susan, before we go to Kristallnacht, let me ask you just a couple of other questions. What did your father do to earn a living? What was his living?
Well, my father married into a family. They had a business going for many years already. Actually, my grandfather on my mother's side died in World War I. He was a soldier in the German army, fighting for Germany in World War I. And my grandmother was a widow, and she ran the store, and as my mother grew older, she helped. And eventually, my mother got married, and the store went on until Hitler came to power.
And speaking of Hitler coming to power, you told me about the Schoen family. They were neighbors of yours. And you told me an incident about voting. Will you share that with us? Do you remember when they went to vote?
Yes. When Hitler came to power, yeah. Well, there were so-called elections in Germany, and we all had to go to the polls, naturally. And whoever voted, you had to vote for Hitler because you received a little brooch or whatever you call it, with yes on it. Yeah, I voted for Hitler. And you wouldn't be, caught without it on the street, without that little brooch. So even the Jewish people voted for Hitler, because nobody knew what was in store for them in the future. So we all waited for Hitler.
At some point, I think even before Kristallnacht, you started having vandalism done to your family business.
Yeah, well, when Hitler came to power, then the harassment began against the Jewish people. We had display window in our business, big display windows, and they were smashed in at night. And once we fixed them up again, they put this paint, white paint or black paint, they put Jude on the, and don't buy from Jews. Jews are our downfall. They put it on the house. And it was quite a few times we had to replace the windows. In the beginning, the insurance paid for it, and then the insurance wouldn't pay for it anymore. We had to do it ourselves. But eventually we bought it up, that's it.
And then you started to tell us, of course, about Kristallnacht. What do you were still a girl, what do you remember about Kristallnacht?
Well, as I said, I had to leave this, in the little town I couldn't go to school anymore. I was separated completely from the other children, sitting on a bench all by myself right next to the door. I had to be the first one to leave and the last one to come in. Well, my parents saw I wasn't any help to me. My mental situation, I guess, became, I don't know what you call it, depression, I guess. So they enlisted me in a Jewish school in Frankfurt am Main, where I lived with complete strangers. In 1938, Kristallnacht happened. There was a young Jewish man in Paris. In 1938, the Polish Jewish people who were not Polish, German citizens, born in Germany for generations already. You couldn't just become a German citizen because you were born there. You went you became a citizen from your parents' side. I mean, if the parents were born in Poland, even lived in Germany for many years, the children were still Polish children. So they were all deported, just picked up without any warning, put on a train and put on the border of Poland and Germany, and there's no place to go, no man's land. So a young man who was studying in Paris at that time, and he found out what happened to his parents. He tried to bring the attention of the world to what's happening, went to the German embassy in Paris and killed one of the officers there. So when that happened, a few days later, they organized what they call a pogrom. It was just an excuse to demolish all what still was owned by Jewish people, and any business or whatever was owned by Jewish people was demolished, and men were arrested, sent to concentration camps, and our schools were closed because all the teachers were arrested too. And I just went back home to my hometown at that time. My mother was there. She had to close the business up. We couldn't open up anymore. And my father was in concentration camp for about 4 weeks. He was dismissed because he was a World War I veteran. He was among the first one to let go. With the, how do you call it? He had to leave Germany within a certain time.
So they would let him out of the concentration camp, but he had to leave
Germany because they didn't want to spread the word what was happening.
And he was he was a veteran of the German army.
So luckily, we actually looked to immigrate already.
Susan, let me ask you one more question about Kristallnacht. In addition to destroying businesses, homes were also vandalized. Your home was vandalized.
Yes, yes. I was at that time, and I went to school in Frankfurt am Main, and the hordes came in. They just knocked down the doors and came in with knives and whatever you could to destroy the whole apartment. The dishes were crying out from the cupboards, and everything was demolished.
You told me they
the feather
knocked
beds,
bookcases over, slashed
open out the windows. It was terrible, terrible. And they went from apartment to apartment and did the same thing.
And before your father was arrested, if I remember correctly, he hid for a couple of days, and the Gestapo came.
Yeah, the Gestapo came, and they said if he doesn't give, we have to bring in a body. If he doesn't give himself up, we have to take my mother in to the camps. So my father gave himself up, and they took him to Buchenwald, where he was for 4 weeks, and let go because he was a World War I veteran with the idea to leave Germany right away. He couldn't stay in Germany. So we were ready to trying to immigrate. You know, things became very bad in Germany, and we didn't see any future there anymore. So, but we had no place where to go. We wanted to go to America. You needed relatives in America, somebody to vouch for you, and even if you found somebody to vouch for you, they had to put a certain amount of money into the bank, and then you received a number, and you had to wait for your number to come up. Well, a lot of people wanted to immigrate, and the number was very high, and when we found out when it would be, so they told us it would be about 4 years before our number would be called upon. Yeah. So, but I said in the meantime came Kristallnacht, and my father was arrested, and he was let go, but with to leave Germany.
So you couldn't immigrate, you couldn't get out because of the delays and the visa requirements and all the things you described. So what did he do? What did your father do then?
Oh, so when he was released, he went over the border. He paid somebody to go over the border to Belgium without anything, a little suitcase and just what he had on his body. And it happened to a lot of people at that time, and a lot of people went this way, left Germany this way, but the Jewish community in Belgium welcomed everybody, and they couldn't work or do anything like that, but they had soup kitchens there, and people took them in and gave them room and board and something like that. So while he was in Belgium, his number came up for his immigration to America, and because he had left, the papers had to go to Belgium, and that prolonged the whole system about 6 months, 8 months. And in the meantime, the war broke out. Yeah. So that stopped everything. But he made it out just before America went into the war, just before they invaded Belgium. Just before they invaded Belgium, he made it out. He got to America in February of 1941.
1940, right?
Something like that, right. Yeah. You know, the time is going a little bit. Like 1941, yeah.
So here,
1940.
So here you are with your mother and your grandmother, and I think you moved to Berlin to be close to the U.S. consulate in the hope that you might still get out.
We might still go to America.
Yeah.
So we moved to Berlin. My mother was forced to sell the house. She was the only Jewish family still living in that small town, and life was just made miserable for her. So she sold the property, almost gave it away. We never received the money for it, because after 1938, after Kristallnacht, all the money was confiscated, and you received only a certain amount for your expenses, what you need for food and whatever, but only a certain amount of money. You couldn't have any more. And the money stayed with the government. And when we moved to Berlin, we received 2 rooms. That was my mother, my sister, my grandmother, my father's mother was still with us, and myself. And a lot of these little towns where the Jewish people moved away to bigger cities. And so we were what you call
all crowded together.
Crowded together, right. We had 1 bedroom, communal living room, communal kitchen, communal bathroom, just 1 private bedroom, that's all, and we all slept in 1 bedroom. Life in Berlin, by that time I was a teenager, I had to go to work. So my first job was in a daycare center to take care of children, because all the parents had to work for the war effort. They all had to work in factories for the war machinery. And the children were dropped off 6 o'clock in the morning. We had to be there 6 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, till the last child was picked up. And that wasn't close to home, because we had to take public transportation. And also in 1939 it was, or 40, we all received the honor of wearing a nice yellow star with the name of Jude on it, Jew, and we had to wear it on our outer clothes, so we would be recognized for whoever we are. And that wasn't a very pleasant situation, because we still could use public transportation at that time. And you know, when you're young and you branded like this, we try to hide it. But if you were caught hiding it, you received the punishment too. So anyhow, I worked in the children's home, and they were dropped off in the morning. I worked all day till 8 o'clock at night, went home, and that was it, 7 days a week. People had to work 7 days a week.
And then, Susan, the deportations started,
yeah.
And you and your family were deported to Riga, Latvia. Tell us about that.
Deportation started in the fall of 1941. And what happened there, where we lived with, there was another gentleman living and another lady. And the daughter of that gentleman lived about a few blocks away. And one day he tried to get in touch with her, and there was no answer. Didn't know what happened to her. About 2 weeks later, he received a note from Lodz, Litzmannstadt, Poland. Dear Father, due to circumstances that German citizens from Poland will be resettled to Germany, we are resettled here. We are fine, don't worry about us. You will hear from us again. And that was the only time he heard from them, nothing else. Then slowly deportation started. The new one, the next one I knew about was my best girlfriend. It became very organized then. You received a notice by mail, by you, dear so-and-so, by this and this day, you'll be ready, you will be resettled to the east. You can take with you what you can carry. Everything else, what you would like to take, bigger items, you leave at a certain place and it will be shipped to your new destination. Never told where it goes to or where we are going or whatever. We were never told. Our time came, my mother, my grandmother, my sister, myself. In the meantime, we worked actually in factories. And we thought if you work for the war effort, you're kind of exempted
for that.
Exempt from this. But no, that didn't help any.
And if I remember right, you were in a factory making submarine equipment, right?
Receiver for submarines.
Receivers for submarines.
Yeah. And the Jewish people, the Jewish employees were sitting separately from the Christian people. The Christian people received all lunches, food. We received nothing.
And they received pay.
Well,
right.
Pay was no
Not
pay.
for you.
The pay went sent to the nothing at all. No
Not
pay.
And you were told that if you were suspected of any sabotage, you'd be executed.
You better not. Yeah. So we worked in that. So where was I?
Deportation to Riga.
Deportation. Yeah. We received a notification that to be ready on this and this day, you can take with you what you can carry. Everything else you bring to a certain place, and it will be shipped to your new destination. So first of all, we put a lot of clothes on us. Like they came Friday evening. The Gestapo came at the date where they said they would come, show us all your bank books, papers, whatever you have money, you can take with you 10 marks, I think they gave us, for transportation, public transportation. Everything you leave here, and this is it. You sign your papers, you sign the note that you do it on your own free will. So we took our little hand package, we couldn't take much, and we took public transportation to the only synagogue that was not destroyed during Kristallnacht. That was the point of concentration for all the people. It was Friday night, I remember that. And eventually in that synagogue showed about 100,000 people. Children, old people, young people, a mixture of people, population. And it became, we had a lot of clothes on us. We figured what we have on us, we cannot take, we have. But anyway, we stayed in that place for about 2-3 days. We were registered. And again, we had one more ID left that was called the Kennkarte with the J on it, Jude. So you would be recognized. Nobody had passports anymore. They were all confiscated. And that was taken away from us too. And there we found out we would be resettled to a place called Riga, Latvia. Okay, Riga, Latvia. Came Sunday morning. We were assembled in front of the synagogue. And we were marched to a railroad station called Grünewald in Berlin. That's a suburb of Berlin. And we looked for the train to be resettled to Riga. And what we saw was the cattle cars, only cattle cars. The cattle cars, the doors were open. We looked inside, we went inside, and there were benches made out of straw all around the walls. On each side of the end of the wagon were 2 buckets for your physical needs and a bucket of water, and that's it. That was it. Once the train was full, everybody was in, we went. We traveled 4 days and 4 nights, I remember. A very cold winter in 1942, January 1942. It was very, very cold. No heat in the wagons, nothing. We arrived in Riga on end of January, no, beginning February it was, end of January, I don't remember exactly the dates. End of January, I think it was. And they opened up the wagons, out, 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 everybody out. You could hardly move because from the cold you were stiff, you were frozen. Old people couldn't move. And there were the trucks staying there, and the SS was there with their guns and with their dogs. And we were told, if you can, you have to walk about 10 kilometers. If you cannot walk, here are trucks, you can go on these trucks, and we will take you to your new destination. Well, the people who went on the truck we never saw again. It was mostly older people or women with children who figured, you know, it was hard to walk for them. They went on the trucks and we never saw them again. My family, we walked the 10 kilometers in snow and ice very slowly. It took almost the whole day. And we came to a place in Riga, which was, what was it called? Well, it was like a suburb of Riga, for a poor section of the city of Riga, very poor section it was. And we came to the place, and they pushed us in apartments, and no light, no heat, nothing. And we saw frozen food laying there and clothes everywhere around the place. Just chaos, all around chaos. And we didn't know what happened. But it was nighttime, we didn't give it much thought. So where we ever found a place to sit, we sat down and that was it. In the morning, when daylight came, we looked around, we went outside, and a lot of ice and snow and blood, frozen blood, and frozen animals, and terrible, terrible sight. Still, we didn't know what happened. Back to the house, no food, nothing for a few days. Eventually, we received a piece of bread. There was some frozen food left in the apartments, which we eventually kind of figured out to eat. And came February the 5th. I remember this like today. Everybody out of the buildings, everybody assembled in the street. The place was surrounded by barbed wire, two different fences of barbed wire, yeah, completely surrounded. You couldn't go out of the place there. And we were assembled and we were looked over, and the trucks were staying there. And the SS looked us over, and just like this it went, this. If you went this way, you went on the truck, and you went this way, you went back to the house. So my grandmother was taken away from us. My mother, my sister, and myself, we went back into the house.
Susan, I remember you telling me that they would tell the elderly people that were with you, we're going to put you in a fish factory where you'll be able to work indoors, it'll be warm.
That was the second time around.
The second time.
The second selection,
okay.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, there came transports from all over Germany, from Austria, Western Germany, Western Europe. Jewish people were transported there. And eventually the ghetto was overflowing, and came February, in February it was. Again, everybody out of the house, the selections were coming, and people taken away, always taken away. Mostly mothers with children were taken away, and elderly people. People who could work, they figured who could work, they kept them alive for a while.
Susan, you would remain in the Riga ghetto for 20 months, from the end of January, early February 1942 to September 1943. Tell us what your life was like in the Riga ghetto over those 20 months, what you were forced to do, and you touched on this a little bit, but the image you described of arriving in a place that is just covered in ice, indoors, outdoors, it's just a coating of thick ice on everything. And I think the very first job you were made to do was to
go to the city of Riga,
yep.
And they supplied us with big ice
like
picks.
Iron rods, ice picks.
Ice picks, and we had to loosen the ice from the sidewalks So the citizens of Riga could walk on the sidewalks. We were not allowed to walk on the sidewalks. We had to walk in the streets. Before we went, we received a piece of dry bread, nothing warm to eat all this time, nothing at all. Just bread, and that was it. So we marched to the city and we worked there all day from morning daylight till nighttime came, and back to the ghetto. Back to the ghetto, there was nothing to look forward to. If you were lucky, somebody in the street gave you something to eat, actually. Some citizens of the street. And eventually we received some food in the ghetto. It was then became more organized, so we received some rations in the ghetto, but we had no place where to cook or do anything like that. So people became smart engineers. We had intelligent people there. They found scrap of iron or whatever it is, and they built little stoves from it. And while we went to work and we found a piece of wood or something, we picked it up and we took it home. And that's how we cooked our stuff.
You shared with me that there was an attempt by all the Jews there to try to create some sense of a community while you were there, try to do some education if possible.
Well, children who were still there, we created a school, like a daycare center, where the children, not to show that they're running in the streets. They were never allowed to go in the streets, the children. They were always supervised by adult people in homes, I mean in rooms, wherever they were living, or they had like a daycare center for children, where when the parents had to go to work and the children, they still had the children, where they dropped them off, and they never could go outside. They never were allowed to go outside, the children.
What was the other work that you were forced to do while you were there?
Well, besides shoveling snow, what was my next job? My next job was I worked for the Air Force. Well, that was actually a good job because it's what inside. We were not exposed to the cold weather. And we sat in the basement and we sorted out the potatoes. They delivered the food to them. But everything was frozen, so the potatoes came frozen, so we had to pick out the good ones from the bad ones. And that was good because the bad ones we could take home with us. Actually, we were allowed to take home, but it tasted horrible. Oh, God. But again, you know, you worked for the military. Some people had still a human heart. You could find some human beings among them. And I always say that's why I survived, really. That's why I survived. Because if you wouldn't have somebody to look out, not look out for you, but have a little bit feeling that's what's going on and help you a little bit. That's how I survived, really.
And at some point, you then were forced to go outside the ghetto, I think, to dig peat. To dig.
That was in the summertime.
Summertime.
It came summertime. In Latvia, they call it peat moss. It's peat moss. And they use it for heating and burning and cooking. And so in the summer, we were taking young girls, mostly young girls and young men, and sent outside the ghetto, about 40, 50 kilometers outside the ghetto. And there were big fields, and we had to dig out the big peat moss from there. And that was dug out and put on bridges, like wood bridges, and put on the lawn to be dried and turned over and dried up again, and then it was shipped into the city. And that was...
And used for fuel for the citizens there, right?
Yeah, this was in the country, which was not too bad, actually. We felt free. We didn't have a gun over our head all the time. And there was a nice river there. We went swimming a little bit. And, you know, there was a reprieve of some sort for a while.
But I think in late August or September 1943, you were brought back into the ghetto. And what you said to me is, we kind of knew what the ball game was then. That was a quote from you.
Well, we heard news. We've had some kind of We didn't have radios or anything like that. Nobody had a radio. But where we worked, places we worked, there were radios. And if you had a chance, you could always listen to the news. And there was always, the good news was the German had a successful retreat. It was always a successful retreat from the Eastern Front. But the retreat didn't come very fast. They were very, very slow, very slow. We were in Riga until 1944. The ghetto was liquidated, and we all went to concentration camps there. They opened a actually concentration camp called Kaiserwald. Already there, men and women were separated. There were no more children there. Everybody had to go to work, mostly young people, no old people anymore. And, but again, I have to say I was lucky. When the ghetto was liquidated, there was an organization called Meteor, and this factory made pontoon boats, where the German army, if they had to cross a river, they had the boats, they put bridges over, made bridges. And when they were shut up, they came to this place and we had to repair the boats. The situation was also like a reprieve for us, really, because the one who oversaw it was a civilian, a German civilian, and he was one of 5 sons, and 4 were already gone on the front. The only one was survived, was made the director of the facility, and I have to say he had a human heart. I mean, he could not help us, but make it more pleasant than it's supposed to be.
He could have made it worse.
Yeah, he had a human heart, let's put it this way. But he couldn't help us at the end, he couldn't help us anyway. When the Russian army came closer and we were evacuated, the whole army left Riga, the German army, and the ghetto was eliminated, and all people disappeared. And people who were able to work were put on a boat. And
Susan, before you go there, as you were being evacuated from Kaiserwald, you had explained, this was mid-1944, the summer of 1944, you said there was a period where you were just waiting and groups of young people were sent out. Do you remember telling me that?
Yeah, there was Riga had a very nice population, Jewish population at that time, but when the Germans came in, all but 4,000 men were eliminated. They kept 4,000 men for work. The rest was all eliminated. By the end, when the Russian army came closer, they wanted to cover up what they did, I guess. And people from Kaiserwald, they organized groups of 40 men each day. They had to go out and uncover the graves and burn the bodies, burn them. And whoever went on that job during the day, they never came back. They killed them there. So because they didn't want any witnesses back.
And the next day it'd be another group of 40.
Next day another 40, another 40, another 40. And what was left then, when we were all deported on a boat, and shipped to Germany, concentration extermination camp called Stutthof, which was an extermination camp already.
Right. Tell us about Stutthof.
We arrived in Stutthof. Arbeit macht frei, beautiful sign, beautiful lawns, beautiful flowers. We thought we were in heaven. We walk in, the picture changed very quickly. Barracks, nothing but barracks, stones on the ground, people walking around in the striped clothing, hungry, miserable, shaved their heads. Our heads were shaved before we left Riga, actually. We were all bald, no heads, no hair on our head. Life in Kaiserwald, in Stutthof, was appel in the morning, 5 o'clock. I mean, you had sleeping quarters were bridges, 3 high, and you laid like the sardines.
Like sardines.
Just like sardines. One blanket to a person, that's it. By that time we had the striped clothing already and wooden shoes. Luckily, I was only about 2 weeks in Stutthof. No, Stutthof, then we went to Germany, right? From Stutthof, we had Germany. Yeah, from Stutthof, they took us out. One day we stood at Appell, and we counted and counted. They counted out 400 women, took us out from the camp, put us on a train, and sent us to a place called Sophienwalde in Pomerania, Germany, Pomerania. We arrived there. The camp was made out of plywood, little huts made out of plywood. In each hut, they pushed 15 people. Only straw on the floor, nothing else. 1 blanket we had. And so the first day we didn't know what to do. The next day we all had to get out. We were called out. The whistle blew. We had to get out. We counted. There were the ladies from the SS. We had 3 ladies. Martha, Erika, and I forgot the other one's name. One was a beast, one was more human, and the other one couldn't care less as long as she had a boyfriend. She was okay. So that was our life. So we were, every day we had to go to work. In the morning we received shovels and picks and stuff, and we marched to woods, and we had to take out the woods from the ground, the trees from the ground, because they were supposed to build a military exercise ground there.
So you had to dig out all the roots.
We had to get the roots out from the trees, which was hard work. It wasn't easy. I mean, we were girls, not men. We had no muscles, but the ice picks, we had to do it, pull them out, put them in the lorry like train, and then we had to push the lorry to a dump where everything was dumped, the lorry back to the woods, fill it up again, and that was our day's work. We received a piece of bread in the morning, and a piece of bread when we came back from work, and if you had a bowl, if you were lucky, you had a bowl, you received a bowl of soup. And that was our nourishment.
And then in the late winter of 1945, as the Russians advanced, you were evacuated from there and forced to go on what is known as a death march.
Right. Well, when it got colder and there was no heat in these barracks, that took us to these unfinished buildings that we built. And in the basements, they put straw, and we were there. But again, no heat, no nothing, and just one piece of bread and a plate of soup a day. It came February. Yeah, the Russian army came much closer. And one day the commandant came and said, assembled us, and he said, look, we cannot stay here. The Russians are on our heels. We have to evacuate from here. If you are able to walk, you sign up, you can walk. And if you are not able to walk, you stay here and somebody will take care of you. Well, the ones who signed up, they marched out, and the ones who stayed behind, we never heard from them again. We marched 10 days, every day, kilometer, wooden shoes, a very flimsy coat, not much.
And an especially brutal winter.
Brutal winter. 1942 was a
45. The winter of 45
was a terrible cold winter. Yeah. Walking on ice and snow, and walking through villages, and the kids were throwing snowballs at us. It was just terrible. At nights they put us in a barn for rest, and in the mornings we marched again. And that was it for 10 days, until we came to a place called Sophienwalde, right?
Sophienwalde.
Yeah. Sophienwalde, we entered that camp. It was, it used to be a POW camp for Russian POWs. And they were already evacuated too. So we went in there. When we went there, it was empty, but eventually it filled up because people came from all over the places. There were sub-camps everywhere where people worked all over Eastern Germany. And from the sub-camps that the Russian army came closer, we all were concentrated in that place. I don't know what the idea was, what would be the end there or whatever, I have no idea. But anyhow, we were in this place for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I guess. Again, the Russian army came very close. We heard already shooting. We heard the shootings already. And they say they assembled us. We cannot stay here. If you can march, we have to leave. And most of us went at that time, yeah. And we marched the whole night. And we came to a place in the morning called Chinov. And they pushed us in a barn, a big barn, and closed the door. And that was it. And left us there. Well, we lay down, there were animals there, and we thought that is the end for us. But in no time, it was in the early morning hours, we heard big shooting, big booms, and we said, oh, well, that's coming closer, and it's meant for us. But it was the Russian army that was chasing the German army, and we were liberated
by the Soviets,
by the Russian
by the
army.
Russian army.
On March 10, 1945. Yeah. The doors were open. We went out. The wagons were packed. The German people packed their wagons because they wanted to go west, away from the Russian army. And they packed all what they could take with them. And we became savages, what you call it? Well, that's how we had our first food. And my first food was a piece of bacon. And I got sick. I sure got sick. Yeah, but soon enough they told us, don't eat anything. We were told not to eat anything at all because our stomachs couldn't take any food, just couldn't take food. So the Russians took us to work. They said, you could work for the Germans, you can work for us too. So we were taken to a farm, German farm, where the people had left already also. And it was March by that time, and we had to clear the fields, put the seeds down, take care of the animals that were left there. But we were cleaned up, we got clean clothes, got rid of our lice, and we had food, potatoes in the morning, potatoes at noon, and potatoes at night, with different meats. But potato was the mainstay. And soon enough, we all looked beautiful.
And speaking of looking beautiful, Susan, I know our time's running short, that leads, of course, to you having to tell us how you met your future husband. Will you do that?
Well, once the work for the farm was finished and everything was on the ground and taken care of, the next job was the Russians took us to a city called Köslin in Pomerania, where the German population, most of them had left, and we had to clean out the houses, put them all in, whatever we found in the houses went into warehouses to be shipped to Russia. Don't forget, when the Germans went into Russia, they plundered Russia very good too. So that was all sent to Russia, and that was our job. We didn't cook for ourselves. We had a communal kitchen. We were at that time about 10 girls. We all lived in an apartment. And we were 10 girls, but we didn't cook for ourselves. There was a communal kitchen that was run by a Jewish officer from Romania. And one day we went there to eat, and that was it. But one day there were, from the Russian part, from the Russian military, there also came people who ate there. And one day, a young man showed up there, and the proprietor of the kitchen told them, hey, we have survivors here, and we have some sick people here. How about you look after these people and take a look what they need and if you can help the sick person. So he went and looked at my friend, and he was a doctor in the Russian army, and that's how I met my husband, who was a doctor in the Russian army at that time. And it was love at first sight.
And there's more to it than that, because there were genuine
My daughter's here. She hears the story for the first time.
If I can share a little bit, there was the young women were worried about the Russian soldiers that were all around. So
we had to protect ourselves very much.
So Herman put up a sign saying this group of women are under quarantine for infectious disease.
Typhus.
And then, if the story continues, then he did some bribing with vodka and kielbasa.
Vodka to take me out of there because they didn't want to let me go.
And took you and got you in a tank that he had gotten somebody to drive with you in the tank to get you
out of the place. Yeah. Then we went together. We went to. He was still in the Russian army. He was a doctor in the Russian army, and we went after the occupied eastern part of Germany. We were in eastern Germany for a while. And then we went back to Poland, and we got married. And we lived in Poland for a while until what was that? The Kells program. Well, the Poles didn't like very much when the Jewish people came back to their cities and went back to their houses, which they had occupied in the meantime, and they wanted the houses back. So they organized a pogrom in the city of Kells, where they killed all the Jewish people who came back from the camps. And when that happened, we saw there's no future in Poland for us. We wanted to stay in Poland. There was no future for Jewish people in Poland. And there was, at that time, organizations, Jewish organizations, that took people out of Poland into West Germany. And that's where we wound up in West Germany.
Susan, in the little time we have left, how did you locate your father, who, as you told us earlier, had made it to the United States?
My father made it out. He came to the United States just before America went into the war. And we corresponded for quite a while. And I kept his address in my head the whole time. I always had it. I never forgot his address. And when we were liberated and in transfer back and forth, we didn't know where to go. I had a letter prepared just in case I had an opportunity to mail it somehow. So one time along the way, I saw an American soldier, and I asked him if he would do me a favor and mail this letter to this address, and he did. And that's how my father knew that I'm alive. But we couldn't correspond because I had no permanent address yet. So once I had a permanent address, I wrote to him again, and that's how we got in touch.
So when did you finally get to the United States?
We came in 1947.
47, so 2 years after the war ended.
We went back to Poland. We wanted to stay in Poland, actually, but after that pogrom, we left. Yeah. So we went to a DP camp in Germany. And at that time, America opened up the doors, which were very closed before the war. But the doors were opened up for DPs, and we fell into this quota, and we came to America. And since I had my father in America, he vouched for us too, so we came to America.
Susan, when did you learn about what happened to your mother and your sister?
Well, we were separated in Riga. I went to one work camp, they went to another work camp. We had no control over our lives. This you do, yeah. After the war, as much as I remember now, I got in touch, or a woman found me who was together with my mother in the last camp. And she wrote to me what happened to my mother. Yeah. My mother died actually of natural causes in that camp, from starvation. I mean, but she always told me she was good. She had a job where she was the cleaning lady, so she didn't have to work too hard. And she also had some extra, but at the end she got typhus. Typhus broke out, And she died of typhus, and so did my sister.
And so did your sister.
Yeah.
Susan, we have a couple of minutes for some questions from our audience. Is that okay? Shall we?
Sure.
Okay. If you don't mind, we have our ushers have microphones, and we're going to ask that if you have a question, please make sure you have a microphone so it'll be passed down to you. Please make your question as brief as you can, and I will repeat the question just to make sure that we not only hear it here, but that everybody hears it in the audience. So who would like to ask Susan a question, if anybody would? We have just a couple of minutes to do this. All right. We have one here. Thank you, sir.
How well were you received in the United States, and how were you employed, or your husband employed, once you came back to the States?
The question is, how were you received once you got to the United States, and then how did you basically financially manage? How did Herman find work, and yourself?
The Jewish community in America was very generous at that time, and they had sponsors, and they helped quite a bit. The Jewish community helped. We came to my father, so my father was here. They didn't have to worry about me too much or my family, but we received help. We did receive help, yes. And my husband, he didn't speak English. I spoke a little English. I learned in school. My husband, not at all. And his first job was in a Jewish bakery cutting bagels at night. That's what he did.
And then he learned English, and
We went to night school. We all went to night school right away. Every night school.
and when you
And at the end, he wrote quite a few books.
yes, quite a few books. Okay, all right. Do we have another question? Okay, we have one right there in the middle. Yes.
Were you able to observe Shabbat, or really any of our holidays at all?
Were you able to observe Shabbat or any Jewish holidays at all during that time?
In the ghetto, we had a synagogue. We did have a synagogue in the ghetto. My mother used to go. I had to work. There was no choice. If you had to work, you had to work. My mother, she went. Yeah. Jewish life? No, we had no Jewish. We did have concerts, come to think of it. Yes, we did have concerts. The Riga ghetto was actually two ghettos. One was for the Latvian Jews and one was for the German Jews. The Latvian Jews had quite a few artists in their group. And we have concerts. We had concerts, actually. And the SS came to listen to it. Yeah, for free.
Okay. I think we're probably ready to close the program. I'm going to turn back to Susan to close our program, because it's our tradition at First Person that our first person has the last word. So I want to make sure we do that. But first, I want to remind you that we will have First Person programs each Wednesday and Thursday through mid-August, and so hope that you'll have an opportunity to return. And as I mentioned earlier, the website has information about each of our upcoming first-person programs. When Susan finishes, she's going to step off the stage and make her way as quickly as possible, we hope, up the side and out. So let her get by if you can, so she can get up to the top of the stairs and sign copies of several books of Herman's that are available. And so hope you'll have a chance to chat with her there, perhaps ask a question, and get a book. Susan?
Well, thank God I'm here. I survived. It was a terrible time. It should never happen again. But reading the papers today, it's not so. That things are happening all around the world. I have beautiful family. I raised a beautiful family. I hope so.
You did.
We have how many doctors in the family? 3 doctors, 3 teachers, CPA. Thank God for that. The time, I mean, I miss my family. The older I get, the more I miss them, really. But they're gone. And I'm here and do the best I can. That's it.
Thank you, Susan.